Okay, we've spoken about the fabric. I've put on the website, on the page, the amount that I needed to get to do the single quilt size. If you let me know what size quilt that you want to do, we'll adjust that and I'll give you the measurements for that. We'll work out what you need. To make it easier, I've labelled the fabric A, B and C. What I suggest is when you get your fabric that you just do yourself some little labels and pin it on so you know which corresponds to which, but more about that later. Just thought while we're at this stage that we'll talk about the tools that we'll need. Now, quilting is one of those hobbies where you could spend a fortune buying stuff. There's new rulers and different tools coming out nearly every week to make his life easier. You tend to find as you go along that you stick with certain ones. So what I thought I'd show you is the ones that I use all the time, and I don't just use them for quilting, I find that I use them in other things that I do. So I'll show you the ones that we'll be using. We can manage without them, but it makes life a lot easier if you do have them. So first one is the Rotary Cutter. This is a 45mm one. This is an awful one. I got it years ago. There is some expense there, but all of the ones that I've got are between 5 and 10 years old. I've never had to replace them so far. So they may cost a bit of money to get in the first place, but if you get decent ones, then they'll last you a lifetime, or almost anyway. So this is a 45mm Rotary Cutter. This is great for cutting out your pieces for your blocks. It will cut through, if you've got a new blade, it will cut through several layers at once. It is good to replace that blade regularly. They soon dull and get blunt on fabric. Do not use on paper. I have a separate one that I use for paper. Scissors. I have a small pair that I use for snipping threads to make that easier, and then you want some fabric scissors for cutting. I tend to just use that for cutting my wadding. The Rotary Cutter usually does everything else. Alright, so come to rulers. The one that I use, well, we've been using quite a bit, is this one. It's a 6.5 inch by 24 inch ruler. In this country we have to buy fabric by the metre, but quilting is done by the inch. So you soon get used to that. You just have to do the calculations when it comes to buying your fabric. So on this one you have, it's marked out at every 1/8 of an inch across. You have a little mark. I'll put some photos up just to make it easier because I'm not sure whether you actually see it on the camera. As you can see, this is quite worn, but the red squares are 1 inch square, the dotted lines are 1/4 of an inch square, then you've got lines along the 1/8 of an inch, and then there's just 2 red dashes along to mark the 1/8. I'll put pictures of that. This is a so easy make, and 2 of mine are that make. So that one I use for cutting my strips. This is what I use for cutting along the edge of the quilts. So that one is used a lot. Another one that I use a lot is a 6.5 inch square. I find that it's easier for cutting the smaller 2.5 inch squares and the triangles. When you're buying one of these, just check that you've got the diagonal line going across. That is so helpful for when we're cutting out the half square triangles and squaring them off. So I use this one for squaring off squares, obviously up until 6.5 inches. But those diagonal lines really what make it easy for squaring off your half square triangles. I'll go into the terms for the different blocks as we go through them. This one, you've got lines obviously every 1/2 inch that go all the way across and all the way down, and then there's dashes to mark the 1/4 inch all over the ruler, and then on the edges you've got your 1/8 of an inch marked as well. So that detail is quite useful. So this is an easy quilting one, Easy Square Junior. So that's the other one, and the last one that I use is 12. This is a 15.5 inch square one, because a lot of the squares that I use for the are 12.5 inches. This is very good that you can square those off, makes it easier, and I use this also when I'm doing cushions. So this one, you've got your red lines are marking your inch square, you've got lines across for your 1/2 inch and 1/4 of an inch and little dashes, and they go all the way across to mark the 1/8 of an inch. I will put all those, I'll get photos of those so you can see all the marks on there, so you can actually see them. When I got mine, I basically did an internet search to see, and then compared prices. But as I say, especially for that one, make sure that what you're going for has the diagonal lines on. I will have a look and put some links up. Cotton Patch that I put on for a link for fabric, they will have rulers and things on. So I'll just see what else I can see on there. So and so may do as well, but I'll check. So that comes to cutting out, and now we come to what we need for the machine. Just give me. For quilting, we use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and most machines will. It's possible to get a 1/4 inch piece in foot. Now I've got to. This is the one that I use most regularly. I'll put again photos on so you can see it clearly. And what you'll see is on this side you've got that one, which will use along the side of your fabric. If you line your fabric up to the edge of that foot, it means that you've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it's essential for quilting that you use the same quilt allowance all the way through, and it's accurate, because that will help make piecing your blocks together easier. So that's the one I use most often, and then it went walkabout and I couldn't find it and I needed to finish a quilt. So I bought a new one. So this one actually has a guard along that side to mark your 1/4 inch. Again, I'll put a photo on. Now this is going to be personal choice as to what you find easier to sew with. I found this took a while to get used to, obviously because it's just different to what I was looking at. It took a while to get used to. But as soon as I found that one, I went back to it. It's what I was more comfortable with. But you will find which is more comfortable to you. Most of these feet are interchangeable with most machines. Check with your manufacturer of your machine. If you have any problems, give me a shout, and I'll see if we can find somewhere where you can get them from. So the other one is a walking foot. This is what we use when we're quilting. This is for straight line quilting. I use it quite a lot. It's not just for quilting, any sort of sewing that you do with a thick layers, and also things like leather and that. It's quite useful. What it does, normally on your machine, your feet come from underneath and pull your fabric across. This bit there will attach to the bar. I'll show you all this when we come to it, on your sewing machine. So as your needle goes up and down, that will go up and down, which moves this along, and that bit on there, you'll see it has teeth on there as well. Obviously not sharp, but it pulls the top along at the same as the bottom, so you reduce your risk of puckering. So for your sewing machine, you need those two. For your machine it might look differently. This is obviously an older one and suitable for my machine, but they'll all have a similar appearance. Again, if you need any help finding one, let me know. So 2 feet for your machine, 3 recommended rulers, although it is possible to do it without. If you don't have a ruler, a large set rule, where you have the long side and quarter, usually in a triangle, that is useful, because what you want to do when you do your blocks, you want to have square corners, 90-degree corners. So if I can give you any help, give me a shout. And again, we'll come back to these as we use them throughout the quilt, but that gives you an overview and gives you a chance to collect together a few bits and pieces while you're getting your fabric. So we've got our tools, we've got our ruler, we've got our rotary cutter, we've got our fabric, and then we can start getting to the fun part of cutting fabric and sewing it together.